Well, I think we can get started here. So my name is Christian Sternke, one of the co-chairs of the ITE Wisconsin Safety Council, along with Dan Brugman, who will introduce himself shortly. But thanks for coming to our next ITE Wisconsin Safety Council meeting. Just a reminder that this will be recorded and put up on our YouTube page. The flyer that was sent out with the meeting can be used for the half PDH form if you need to get PDHs with it. And now I will send it over to Dan.
Yeah, hi everybody, welcome. If you're new to us, a couple people are, we'll get you added to the distribution list going forward here so you can sit into these if not. But today we've got a presentation from Ryan Meyer, who's the state signing engineer within the Bureau of Traffic Operations at WSDOT. And I'll hand it over to him.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I've been the state signing engineer for the last 6 or so years. Project development and traffic safety prior to that with WSDOT as well. I guess I'll apologize for those of you who have sat in on this presentation previously. I gave essentially, the same presentation more or less back on May 5th, talking about parts 2 and part 7, signs in school zones specifically. Today I have cut some of the more boring stuff out of that and added other boring stuff from the other various parts of the MUTCD, with a little help from Dan on what you guys might want to see here today. So hopefully we'll cover things that are of interest to you, and feel free to ask questions throughout, or wait till the end. I'll kind of keep my eye on the chat box here too. As I said, parts 2 and part 7, I'll be able to hopefully give you a decent answer on questions. The rest of it may need to get back to you on it, but we'll give her a shot here. So I'll shut my camera off. Get rolling here. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the MUTCD. You guys are, I'm sure, familiar with the MUTCD, but contains standards and guidelines for traffic control devices. The idea of it being that you're trying to provide consistency nationwide in traffic control standards. The 11th edition of the MUTCD, we just adopted it. There's a bunch of statutes that say that we need to adopt a manual, and Wisconsin decides that we've decided that we develop a state version of the MUTCD, the WMUTCD. That WMUTCD must be in substantial conformance with the national version of the manual. This year, or this go round, I should say, we worked a lot closer with FHWA than I believe has been the case in the past. There's a significant effort on FHWA's part to make sure that our manual conforms with the national manual, whereas in versions past, I don't know that was, maybe a little bit less emphasis which was put on that. And so if you look at the Wisconsin MUTCD, the previous version, you'll see a significant amount of state-specific text in that manual, as compared to this new manual, where once again, we're trying to be consistent nationwide. So ideally, you would, more or less have no state-specific text in the manual on uniform traffic control devices. But obviously, there are cases where state statute require you to do something that is, necessary to include that in the Wisconsin manual. So all that to say, we have less state-specific text in this new version, and I believe that's consistent with any states that have been, creating their own manual. A lot of states went through a fair amount of work this this time around with conforming to the national manual. As I kind of touched on, our WMUTCD combines state-specific standards, guidelines, and statutory references with the federal language, can provide additional supporting information, and then it's better than utilizing two separate documents, which is another option some states do, and Wisconsin used to do, have an MUTCD and they supplement to the MUTCD. People didn't like that, and I would think that the way we do it now is a little bit nicer, all in one spot. So changed that in 2017. A little bit about the MUTCD and the way it's written. There are standards, things that shall be done or shall not be done in the bold text, guidance that are recommended, things that should be done, and then options may be done with different types of font. In the new version of the Wisconsin MUTCD, the state-specific text is blue. It was previously red. The reason that was done was simply for colorblindness. I think it's easier for people with that to see blue than it is to see red. So that's the only reason why we changed colors there. Location of Wisconsin MUTCD, if you just Google WIS.MUTCD or WMUTCD, Wisconsin MUTCD, it'll take you to this page. Parts are kind of split out into different pieces here. And then at the bottom of this website, you can find the 2009 version, which is sometimes nice to look at if you want to see what what we had in place previously, why a decision was made years ago. You can find that previous 2009 version at the bottom of this web page. It's a link, and it just takes you to the whole thing. So it's takes a while to load up, but at least you can kind of compare to what was previously used in Wisconsin. The TOPS ties into all this, obviously, because we have everybody in Wisconsin has to follow the Wisconsin MUTCD. The state DOT decides, if we have additional guidance that we want to follow, we put it in the TOPS so that it's something that WISDOT does, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done by local municipalities. They can certainly follow our guidance in the TOPS and certainly would encourage that, but there's no obligation to do so. So if the MUTCD says you may use a sign, for example, you may use a sign in the TOPS, we would, there's a possibility we would have guidance on when we want to use it, right? So MUTCD says you may use it, and we say, well, let's use it in these cases. I guess I should mention too that so with this change to the new manual, the new version of the manual, there were a lot of changes necessary in the TOPS. A lot of it is just kind of like different sections were moved in the MUTCD, so I just had to essentially put change the section numbering on some of that stuff. But there's some other changes that needed to be made, and it's currently under well, I'm putting the finishing touches on the revision, and then FHWA will have to review that for compliance with the manual. So that should be updated in the near future, the TOPS. Along with all these other changes, we cleaned up our sign plates as well. There were new signs added, signs taken away. WISDOT had historically used different sign codes than the MUTCD had in some cases, and so, like I said before, a lot of effort was put in this time to ensure that WISDOT is in compliance with the manual, and that includes having sign codes match the manual. And so there are a fair amount of changes to sign codes as WISDOT knows them. So that'll be a little bit of a learning process there, although in the end it's going to be very nice because our sign codes will match national sign codes, and then it should be nice and easy. You could look in the WMUTCD or TOPS and everything is called the same thing. But that's under revision as well. Jumping into it here, I didn't have anything on chapter 1. That's kind of the rules or the reasons why WMUTCD exists. One thing to note in chapter 1 is that there's a spot in there where they talk about compliance dates with this new version of the manual. A few things had, if you change a sign, sometimes FHWA would say, you need to have these signs changed by, within 5 years of adopting the manual. And there are a couple of those, although they're fairly insignificant in that WSDOT had already kind of done the things that they're requiring a state do by that compliance date. So we just skipped that slide, even though I spent some time talking about it, but I thought it was worth mentioning. 2A04, design of signs. If a standard sign exists, we must use that sign. Like I said before, that's why some of the reason why we've got sign plate changes is that we had used a Wisconsin sign when there is a standard highway sign that is, essentially the same thing. And so we must use that standard highway sign as opposed to the one that we've historically used in Wisconsin. So symbols must be identical to those in the standard highway sign manual, and word legend signs can't substitute for standard symbol signs unless allowed in the WMUTCD. So good example of that is, like a keep right. There are 2 versions of keep right in the WMUTCD. You could use a symbol version or a text version. And so that's an option there. But generally speaking, if there's a symbol sign, you should use that as opposed to a word legend sign. Standardization of location. They added some figures on sign use at intersections. So it's kind of some good stuff there. Can be helpful for practitioners to laying out signing plans and that. Getting into 2B, regulatory signs. Signing for right-of-way at intersections, which is 2B06 to 2B20, discusses and addresses control in order of restriction. No control, you control stop, always stop. There added warrants for always stop control. I believe one of those is essentially something that we've done in Wisconsin in the past, where if you've determined an intersection has crash history and you want to put a roundabout in, for example, and you don't want the crashes to continue occurring until the roundabout is built, 5 years from now, you do have the option of, essentially putting in an always stop in the interim for while the roundabout's being designed. The gist there is to use the least restrictive control that provides appropriate levels of safety and efficiency. Getting into speed limit signs. When speed limit signing, there's reduced emphasis on the 85th percentile, but 85th is still used for technical guidance. Other factors should be considered, like the setting of the roadway. But in a rural situation, we do still say the posted speed should be within 5 miles per hour of the 85th percentile. Adds a list of factors to be considered, like I said just now. Refers to expert systems and safe system approach. In that context must be considered. And if observed speeds greatly exceed posted speeds, other measures should be considered to reduce the speed of traffic. Speed limit signs again. So speed limit signs are obviously traffic control devices, but setting speed zones is an engineering practice. And so one could make the argument that it's not particularly appropriate to talk about how to set speed limits in the MUTCD. In the final version or final ruling, FHWA stated that they may evaluate removing speed zone setting content from the MUTCD in the future. But you would obviously still be able to define the design and placement of speed limit signs in the MUTCD. It would just essentially become a separate document for setting speed limits. Regulatory signs, another one worth mentioning. So at roundabouts, we're replacing the black and white chevrons in the central island with one-way signs. The reasoning there is that FHWA determined that that black and white chevron bank is essentially mixing a regulatory and a warning sign together. The chevrons being generally a warning sign, but then the black and white being a regulatory, and trying to give drivers the direction on which way to drive. And so they didn't like that, mixing the warning and the regulatory signs together into one sign. So the alternative is a one-way sign, and then you can see on the right there that object marker is optional. WSDOT has decided that if any approaching leg of a roundabout is 45 or greater, then all of those one-ways will have object marker underneath them. Of course, you could use those if you had concerns and the speed limit was less than 45 as well, but that's going to be our standard practice. One thing worth noting too, the placement of warning signs. If you guys have looked that up in the past, and you'll remember that in the MUTCD there was always, like, almost all these values were struck through with a WSDOT specific red value next to them. Can't do that anymore. Got to comply with the manual in this case. Generally, so the reasoning there is that WSDOT has been using those values for years and years and years, to the point where we no longer know exactly how we came up with those to begin with. And so, we do know that they seem to be working well for us. So WSDOT is choosing to continue using our specific values, which are, provide a little extra distance to decelerate to the condition. And those values will be able to be found in TOPS 235, which is a new policy that we've created. It's essentially this chart, except WSDOT values of the chart. One thing I'd say about that too is that a little bit greater distance there, especially as you're approaching an intersection, going from 55 to 0 at a stop. Our value has always been 750. MUTCD shows 495. Our argument there is that as you're approaching an intersection, you've got guide signs and other types of signs that need to be posted in advance of the intersection, and that 495 really leaves you very little space to be, putting much of anything if you're looking at keeping sign spacing at a minimum 200 feet. So that's kind of the reason we like our numbers, and we're sticking with them. But no longer would a local look in the MUTCD and see the same numbers that we have. And they can certainly look in the TOPS to find those. Horizontal alignment warning signs and plaques. There's a little bit of some changes there. The charts, tables, I should say, table 2C4 provides a little bit of new direction on the use of them. They take into account the amount of traffic that's on the roadway a little bit. So it's a little bit different. Nothing too crazy though that would make a person think that they got to go out and change all their horizontal alignment warning signs. But it's different, and it's a wider range of devices that can be used. So talk about wider edge lines, rumble strips, that kind of thing. Horizontal alignment warning signs. Again, the new W13 signs for sharp turns and truck rollover. And there's a couple new figures, once again, for some specific kind of cases where, you know, they're giving you examples of what you might do, which is nice. So like that. This is a big one that a lot of people have been interested in. So the vehicle speed feedback signs, well, so there are two versions of this sign. There's a vehicle speed feedback sign and a vehicle speed feedback plaque. The vehicle speed feedback plaque, as you see here, is meant to be placed underneath a regulatory speed limit sign. And it essentially is the classic case of what you see them in Wisconsin. You're, you know, basically warning drivers how fast they're going as compared to the regulatory speed limit. The vehicle speed feedback sign, so it's a larger, a taller sign that looks, you know, the dimensions are essentially the same as a speed limit sign. Those are to be used in advance of a horizontal curve, essentially. So you would put those in advance of curve, and you know, you'd have your advisory speed and that posted with a curve warning sign, that kind of thing. So when used in Wisconsin, the vehicle speed feedback plaque is going to be the thing to use. Has to be black and yellow, or this is a poor job on my part, but could be black and orange in a work zone. Plaque design must be, I just already talked about that. And then the other thing about this is that we have created an approved products list. These are notoriously hard to purchase compliant devices that look like they're supposed to look in the WMUTCD. It's all just different kinds of things out there. On our system, we permit the locals to install these, and so the locals are just essentially just buying whatever they want, maybe the cheapest thing or whoever does the best job selling them. Anyway, we've got an approved products list. It's not that many signs that currently meet the new version of the WMUTCD. I think we've got like three different suppliers with 4 signs of these plaques total on that approved products list, but at least it's somewhere to start. And maybe as companies change to the new manual, they add some more on there in the future. But that's the change there. So the one thing I should also say is that if a municipality has a sign out in the field that does not comply with this new version, essentially it needs to be replaced with a compliant version at the end of its useful life. So we're going to take the stance at WSDOT that we'd like locals to try and do what they can to make their feedback sign comply with the new version as best as possible. Obviously, you're not going to change the color of it, but sometimes they say too fast or slow down, that kind of stuff. That is specifically called out in this version of the manual as not being acceptable. And so you can turn that stuff off on these generally. So that'd be one way to move towards compliance until it wears out and you buy a new one. Chapter 2D, conventional roadways. Not super exciting here, but overhead street name signs will have a white border on them now. It previously didn't have to. And so if you see on monotubes, if you picture that in your head, generally those are all green signs that do not have a white border, but they will now. Conventional roads and in 2D again, I thought this was worth mentioning. This is going to be a change where no longer use the alternate plaque for emergency routes say the interstate, it's now going to be an emergency route to Interstate 39. And it'll be green and white, and with stats, we don't have a bunch of money sitting around to just go out and change all these at once. We're going to change them out on the corridor process, which means you will see a variety of emergency route 2s and alternates over the next 15 years or so, unless somebody comes up with some money to do them all at once, or at least do them in corridors. We're going to kind of take them as they come, with the message to the public and to law enforcement being that it's the same thing. This emergency route 2 is same as alternate. All right, that was it for signing chapter 3A04 line widths. So it says in there that the normal line should be 4 to 6 inches wide, pavement marking, and then a double line should be at least twice the width of a normal line. WSDOT is choosing 6-inch markings on our state highways. It is not a shall condition to use 6 inches. I think initially in the first version, or the proposed version of the manual, they had language in there saying that 6 inches was going to be the normal line width. And so we kind of started doing that. Obviously, there are benefits to having 6 inches lines as opposed to 4-inch. There's crash modification factors and all that for it. Plus, autonomous vehicles like wider pavement marking lines, I think. So we decided, even though it's not required per the WMUTCD, we're still going to stick with 6-inch lines, but the locals can continue to use 4 inches if they'd like. Just some pavement marking retroreflectivity requirements in there. I think these have changed, but it really isn't requiring us to do much of anything, with fairly easy to meet these requirements. So not particularly hard to meet this. Signal warrants in Chapter 4C. Previously, warrants, it was a shall condition to meet. Now it is a warrants should be met. So it puts more emphasis on using engineering judgment to determine when a signal should be considered. One thing to note with that is that TF's Chapter 4 is being updated to keep warrants shall be met for signals on the state truck highway system. And that does include connecting limits. Pedestrian hybrid beacons are allowed at intersections now, previously only allowed at mid-block crossings. And then stop signs shall be installed on the minor streets if the pedestrian hybrid beacon is at an intersection. RRFBs, that was previously a kind of interim approval. Now there's a chapter describing operation and design. Includes recommended message for accessible pedestrian signals. Warning lights are flashing. So that is some changes there. That once again, that new chapter is describing the design and operations and provide a layout of the signs. Wow. Speaking of audible, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there is a alarm going off here at the sign shop. Now it's done. That's good. Sorry about that. Part 5, automated vehicles. This part is new for the 11th edition. Describes different levels of vehicle automation, level 0 to level 5. Don't ask me what's good and what's bad. I I assume level 0 is like no automation and level 5 is full automation, but not 100% sure on that. Different sensor technology, including but not limited to cameras, radar, LiDAR, ultrasonic, and infrared. Just figured it was worth mentioning that this is now in the manual. It's a very short section though, so not a ton of pages there on guidance, but obviously that'll probably get bigger as the years go on. Provides guidance on how to design signs, pavement markings, traffic control devices in a consistent and easy to read manner for various automated sensors. Agencies should adopt policies and practices to incorporate machine vision into their traffic control devices. Chapter 7, school speed limit, school zone signing here specifically. We had previously in Wisconsin always used the school ahead finds higher as the first sign in the on the approach to a school zone. We will now be moving towards what it shows in the manual as essentially a school. Looking over here on the right is where we'd want to look a school sign. That school plaque underneath is optional. We are not going to do that on WisDOT roadways, so it'd just be that school sign, and then school speed limit. And I'll show you on the next page when children are present, and fines double would be instead of fines higher. Our state statute specifically calls out fines doubling, and so we decided to use fines double instead of fines higher. But state statute also, that fines double is only applicable to speeding. That's the only ticket you'd get in a school zone that could be doubled is speeding. Any other ticket is not subject to doubling. So that's why we took the fines higher off the generic school sign and put it underneath the speed limit, because WMUTCD says that's what you got to do. You would use the school in a head plaque in a case where you wanted to warn someone. You've already given them the S11 further down south here. If you needed to re-warn someone, give them advance warning of a specific crossing, is when you would use that ahead plaque underneath the S11. Then obviously you'd use the S11 at the crossing itself with the down left arrow. We took a look as we were reviewing, this whole new manual, and then, our state statutes in association with the new manual. In 7B05, school speed limit assembly, it says a school speed limit assembly shall be used to indicate the speed limit where reduced school speed limit is specified for such areas by state statute. So, of course, in Wisconsin state statute, we have the fixed limits, and one of those is a school zone. And so we read this as we have to install, shall be used, we have to install a school speed limit in our school zones. All of them. Currently, we don't have school speed limits in all of our school zones. A good example of that occurring would be, in a rural area where you've got, say, a high school and it's 55 miles an hour. There's no sidewalk. There's, the chances of a child being at or about the roadway is slim to none. Kids are driving to school or being bused to school. And so we'd historically not put a school speed limit out there. We will be doing so now, and our default will be essentially 10 miles an hour less than the posted speed limit, regulatory speed limit. So in the past, we might have put some school zone signs out, not necessarily the school speed limit, but now we will be placing that school speed limit in all school zones. The plan there is to take that as they come with the corridor signing process. So that'll be another one where for 15 years we'll be kind of working on updating our signing there. I think that's it. Yep. I should mention that, like I did earlier, we've had a few lunch and learns on this. and you can Google WIST BTO traffic training, I think would get you to this website. And you can find the full version of my parts 2 and 7, the recording, and then also recordings of the part 3, 4, 5, part 6, part 8, part 9 presentations. If you're interested in that. That is all I have, unless I'd be glad to take questions from you guys on that. Anybody? Comments?
Nothing's came through the chat, so if anyone or one just came through the chat. Are the dual language tribal signs included in the update too?
That's a good question. So we worked with FHWA, outside of the manual, I guess, when that program was put into place, we used Minnesota's as an example and worked with FHWA leadership to essentially create WISTOT's version of that dual language sign program. We don't talk about it in the WMUTCD. It's probably best to kind of leave that separate. If you were to Google WISTOT dual language signs, you can find our policy on when and where we use those. I can tell you that there will probably be those within FHWA that say that we shouldn't be doing that, but we essentially have a letter from, I can't remember, it was someone higher up in FHWA that said we can, and we certainly have different requirements on what signs can be dual language. Essentially, it's only the ones within tribal land, and then only boundary signs as well as river or lake signs. So it's limited to a certain, essentially 3 different types of signs: boundaries, lakes, and rivers, and only on tribal land. And so that was found acceptable to FHWA at the time. And so we've essentially kind of just followed that initial guidance when we started this program. We, of note, we've only got one tribe left to provide signs to. Stockbridge Muncie. It's the last one left. So it's been a well received program. But yes, one is right to wonder how that fits within the WMUTCD. Got another question here. What are you defining as the school zone? If it's not already signed or designated as such, will it just be the limits of the school property? Yes, that's exactly what it is. So you will have that S11 sign in advance of the school property, and then the school speed limit will be exactly, or as close as possible to the limits of the school property. And so that's, I think in state statute, it kind of describes it that way, as where the school property bounds the roadway. So, yep. And then that also begs the question, do we occasionally you'll see a school crossing that does not have school property next to it, because it's on the safe route to school, and you're not quite to the school yet, and so you can still sign for that school crossing in particular. Our interpretation is that we do not need school speed limits in advance of that separate school crossing. So that's what we got going on there.
Any
Hey.
other questions? Doesn't seem like it.
Nice pictures, John.
MUTCD compliant. Well, singularly, maybe, but yeah, I think there is actually, as I went through the effort with FHWA to bring our MUTCD into WMUTCD into compliance, it forced me to read a significant amount of the manual multiple times, and so I'm pretty sure it says in there you can't put two signs one above the other for added conspicuity. You can't do that. So that's those two stop signs. It's no good. The one below it, I think, yeah, I don't know what you're supposed to do there, but just park, I guess, would have been a better sign. For the speed radar signs, Honore, you're asking, you mentioned an option for orange in construction. I assume a yellow-green color would be required for speed radar signs used in school zones. That is a good question. Yes, I believe that would be the correct option for a school zone. I know in MUTCD it does allow, and we didn't strike this out in the Wisconsin version. We do, the MUTCD does allow like a standard ped sign to be yellow green. WSDOT chooses to just use the yellow green in school zones specifically. But so I'd have to look into it. So I don't know if you could theoretically use the speed feedback sign with yellow green outside of a school zone. I hope not. I would hope that people didn't do that because to me, I like to associate that yellow green with the school zone, even though it's not technically required by the MUTCD. So yes, I think that would be a correct choice. Now, whether or not you'd be able to buy one with yellow green, I would hope you could. I guess I haven't seen any pictures of any of those floating around that that TAPCO or anybody else makes at the moment, but that'd probably be the choice there if they eventually start making them. All right, some more pictures here. Now the 25s, you know, there's minimum spacing requirements on signs, or desirable, I should say, I suppose, spacing between signs. So, you're you don't want signs too close to each other because it's essentially an overload on drivers. So not ideal there, having about 5 feet in between those two 25s. Yeah, that stop sign that's basically worn out, it appears. There are municipalities are required to have a plan to keep their sign retroreflectivity up to standard. So that sign should theoretically be replaced, as part of a general program the roadway maintainer has to keep signs at a minimum retroreflectivity. Honore, where would I find the WSDOT approved products list for speed radar signs that are compliant? So if you just Google WSDOT approved APL approved products list, I can go here, scroll down to signing. Doesn't make a ton of sense, but I just added it to the sign sheeting APL because it's for signing. So you click on that, you'll see standard sheeting, work zone sheeting, and then at the bottom, vehicle speed feedback signs. In particular, that's that plaque, right, that we want to use, not the full-size sign. And here's our list of vehicle speed feedback signs that are approved. Recently occurred, obviously. Carmana, radar sign, and TAPCO. We do have the yellow color in there, but you know, I should look a little closer at that as far as the orange and the yellow green options. I mean, I would assume these guys would be able to make you those if you wanted them. I don't know why they wouldn't. You know, the sheeting color should be interchangeable for them, I would think. So take another look at that. John, too many photos of signs. These are some good, bad examples. Yes, they are. Dan, you put that link in the chat. Thank you. Bill, FHW released version 1 to correct technical spelling format problems with the initial 11th edition MUTCD. Will WSDOT use revision 1 MUTCD for Wisconsin MUTCD? Yes, I believe Emily Silverson had already gone in and made those changes. So if I am correct, all those technical, grammatical changes, that kind of stuff have already been changed in the WMUTCD as you would find it online today. Those should be done. Yeah, we're gonna, speaking of revisions, there are, in warning signs, we have one, a revision coming up where it's 2C55. We're not super happy with the way, well, I should blame myself, the way our Wisconsin specific language came out here. It's kind of unclear on what exactly we're trying to say, in my opinion. So this will be cleaned up in the near future. We've already got the revisions approved by FHWA for a little bit of wordsmithing here to make this make a little more sense for non-vehicular warning signs. So essentially we're saying that if you got a pedestrian or a trail crossing in an area in the speed limit's 45 or greater, in the pedestrian or trail crossing is unexpected, essentially without enough sufficient sight distance. In that case, you shall put a sign for that crossing 45 and above, and then if it's unexpected 40 and below, you may sign for that. So just cleaning that language up a little bit.
Thanks for the good presentation and the great questions and answers following that up. Before we end here, Darren Wolford, the current ITE president, just wanted to plug one thing. So Darren, we can hand it off to you.
Sure. Thank you, Christian. And thank you, Ryan, for the presentation. I know I was in a lot of those lunch and learn meetings and certainly learning a lot. So thank you again for using your time for this lunch presentation for the Safety Council meeting. And thank you for Christian and Dan for organizing it to make it happen. The only thing I wanted to let everyone know about, since we have a pretty good crowd on the call here, is that our updated ITE Wisconsin website is live. So we transitioned to a new web host server. So I would encourage you to go ahead and check out the new website. And I know we're still making some finer tweaks here and there. However, if you have any questions, comments, or things that you may like to see or be enhanced or anything else like that. At the bottom of our initial page has the section email that you can send any of those questions or comments to. So just wanted to plug that out there and then give a great amount of kudos to John Brugman for really leading that effort to get us transitioned here to the new website.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks to everyone. Or were you done, Darren?
Yep, all done. Sorry.
All right, yeah, thanks. And thanks for everyone for logging in today. We're looking to have another meeting at the end of the summer, I think, so a few months out. So stay tuned for some information on that. And with that, have a good rest of your day and week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.